A young Olympic swimmer mysteriously vanished during a routine training session in the ocean, leaving no trace behind. The only plausible explanation was that she had drowned. But 4 years later, her father, who never gave up on his relentless search, discovered something at the bottom of a buoy, a finding that would change everything. Before we begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. It really means a lot to know that you're with us. We're going through this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The cold, desolate sea surrounded Richard Callahan as he dove deep into the still waters. The surface of the water shimmered faintly under the weak light of the morning, filtering through the translucent turquoise, illuminating the rocks and layers of sand on the sea floor. He moved with calm precision, his diving light sweeping over tangled patches of seaweed, occasionally brushing against broken seashells. Each time he exhaled from his oxygen tank, bubbles rose, producing strange sounds that were unique to this underwater world. His hand glided over the mud and fragments of marine life, searching. But every time he felt a sense of disappointment. There was nothing new, just like the hundreds of times before. Above him, the sea warden drifted gently with the current, still anchored at its familiar spot near Pelican's Reach, far from Crescent Bay's shore, a place he called home, although it had never truly felt like it since Zara vanished. 4 years. 4 years since Zara, his only daughter, suddenly disappeared, leaving no trace in the waters he knew like the back of his hand. He had been diving every day, searching every nook he could reach, but finding nothing. Each day was the same, still a hopelessness that could not be hidden. Zara Callahan, a talented swimmer, was the pride of her family and the black community. Despite her youth, Zara had become well known in the sports world, but she also faced many challenges. As a black person in a sport predominantly dominated by white athletes, Zara often had to endure discrimination and mockery from her competitors, but she never let that deter her. Zara's determination and hard work made her one of the standout swimming talents. She had qualified for the Olympic open water swimming team, even though she hadn't yet made a major mark on the international stage. But every morning, Zara still diligently trained on her 4-mile route from Crescent Bay's pier to Pelican's Reach and back, a considerable challenge. Over the years, Richard had always accompanied Zara during her training, watching from the boat, ensuring her safety during the long swims. But about 6 months before she vanished, Zara began insisting on swimming alone. "Dad, I want to do this on my own," she said decisively. "I'll be fine. You wait for me at the pier." Richard was a bit worried, but he respected her independence, though his anxiety never left him. He could only stand there, watching her dive into the water, hoping everything would be okay. But that day, 4 years ago, Zara didn't come back. Each time he thought back to that moment, Richard felt the hours of panic replaying in his mind like a slow-motion film. He called for help, organized search parties everywhere, but found nothing. No Zara, no trace, nothing that could explain her disappearance. As a professional diver, Richard understood the dangers of these waters. He knew every current, every rock ledge hiding beneath the sea, and he knew that sometimes the sea could claim the lives of even the most talented swimmers. But he couldn't accept the truth that Zara was no longer alive. He couldn't give up because he knew he had to find her, bring her home, and say goodbye. She deserved that. Today, after diving deeper into the vast ocean, an indescribable feeling clung to Richard. A hunch, a whisper within him, suggested that maybe he had missed something. After hours of tireless searching, he realized his oxygen tank was nearly empty. Reluctantly, he began to surface, his joints aching from the long dive. As he broke the surface, he realized he had swum farther than he intended. The sea warden was barely a blur in the distance. Richard swam quickly toward the boat, the weight of his diving gear exhausting him. But as he swam closer, he saw a buoy, not the blue water buoy Zara always used. This was a different buoy, one rarely checked. Sensing something unusual, he swam toward it, grabbing the rusted metal frame, trying to regain his strength. He looked up and realized something had been tied to the center of the buoy. Curious, Richard pulled himself up, his hand sliding over the rusty metal surface. When he got closer, he realized it was a GoPro camera. It was protected by a water-resistant casing worn down by time and sea waves, but something about it seemed familiar. When he flipped the camera over, he recognized the familiar sticker, a picture of a blue dolphin with the letters ZR underneath it. He almost couldn't breathe. This was Zara's camera. She had taken it every time she swam alone. Richard's fingers trembled as he removed the casing and took out the camera. Although the battery was dead, the GoPro was still intact. He felt a lump in his throat as he remembered the day he had given it to her. "Take this," he had said. "You'll record your training so I can see how you're progressing." Zara had smiled when she took it. He carefully placed the camera into the waterproof bag and swam back to the boat, his heart filled with a new, unfamiliar feeling, as if a glimmer of hope was beginning to shine through. Richard stepped onto the shore, tightly clutching the camera in his hand, his mood as turbulent as the waves offshore. His sea-warden boat was still anchored in the distance, its stern gently waving in the wind. He looked around, unsure of what to do next. He had found the camera, but now he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth. As Richard entered the Crescent Bay police station, he could clearly feel the cold and indifferent stares from the reception staff. A few people glanced at him without a greeting, perhaps because he was black, an undeniable factor in a small community still carrying prejudice. Although Richard had lived here for many years, he could never shake the feeling of being an outsider, treated differently because of his race. "Mr. Callahan," the receptionist said when she recognized him, but her tone was cold. "Detective Morgan has already called ahead. I'll take you to the tech room." Richard nodded, saying nothing more. His feeling was clear. He had always been an outsider here. When he entered the tech room, Richard saw a man in his 30s sitting in front of a computer, his eyes scanning the screen before he looked up and extended a hand. Though his attitude wasn't outright rude, Richard could sense the lack of enthusiasm in the way he greeted him. "You must be Richard Callahan," the man said, his voice friendly but not overly warm. "I'm Ethan Parker, a forensic technology specialist. Detective Morgan briefed me on your discovery." "Yes," Richard replied, his voice rough from tension. He placed the camera on the table, watching Ethan begin his work. Everything in the room felt too cold, yet professional. Ethan nodded. "So where did you find this camera?" "Far from my daughter Zara's swim route," Richard explained, his voice hardening. "It's hers. She disappeared 4 years ago while training for the Olympics." Ethan listened intently, jotting down notes. "We'll check the contents of the camera." He began removing the battery and inspecting the memory card. "Nothing seems to be broken. That's a good sign." A while later, Ethan inserted the memory card into a reader and connected it to the computer. Richard stood behind him as the data was copied onto the computer. Each passing second felt heavy for him. When the files opened, the first video appeared. It was Zara's face. Richard felt his throat tighten. She was smiling, her wet hair sticking to her head as she adjusted the camera on the buoy. "Check, check," Zara's voice came through the speaker, slightly muffled by the wind. "This is the perfect spot for today's training." Zara's heavy breathing continued to echo in the video. She was training, her mouth constantly talking about exercises and how she felt. "The pressure is huge, but I still don't feel good enough. Am I really cut out for this? Can I achieve my goals?" Richard stared at the screen, Zara's voice still resonating in his mind. He had never known she had such thoughts, doubts, and the pressure she had to endure. The next video showed a young man swimming into the frame. He wore goggles with only his eyes and wet hair visible, his face obscured by droplets of water. "Huh? Hey there," Zara said, her face showing a hint of surprise. "I'm just training." The young man looked at Zara and smiled. "You're swimming far out alone." Zara laughed, speaking with confidence. "I'm training for the Olympics." "Oh, really?" the guy chuckled. "Are you going to be famous?" Zara just smiled lightly, looking at the guy with a sarcastic look. "Maybe not. I'm still just a girl starting out." The conversation quickly stopped as the guy swam farther away, and Zara adjusted her goggles. Both of them started swimming out of the frame. Moments later, a speedboat zoomed across the screen in the distance. Ethan paused and zoomed in on the boat and its logo, trying to make out the characters printed on it. "I've definitely seen this logo before," Richard muttered, pulling out his phone to take a screenshot. Ethan kept searching. "This is the logo of Ocean Elite Marine. They're a local company that supplies boats and equipment for water sports." Richard suddenly remembered seeing Ocean Elite Marine boats earlier that morning. "We'll need to investigate this company and a man named Lucas," Ethan said confidently. "I'll make a sketch of him based on what's in the video, then have someone look into the company." Richard nodded, a mix of hope and fear in his heart. "Thanks. Keep me updated when you get more information." He glanced at his watch and realized he had to attend an event. "I need to go now, but I'll come back later." Ethan waved him off and returned to his work. Richard left the room, but this time he felt a small flicker of light shining through the darkness. When Richard entered the sports club, the bustling and hectic atmosphere of the event made him feel like he had stepped into another world. Olympic banners were hung everywhere, and the scent of chlorine from the nearby pool lingered in the air. Volunteers in uniforms were diligently guiding attendees, creating an energetic environment. In front of the stage was a crowd of former athletes and sports enthusiasts. An event organizer quickly recognized Richard and hurried over. "Mr. Callahan, we were starting to get worried. You're due on stage in 15 minutes, she said, her tone urgent. "Sorry for being late," Richard replied, following her backstage. "No problem. We understand you're busy," the organizer said, waving for Richard to sit down. "We just need to make a few adjustments before you go up." Richard took a deep breath, trying to focus on the speech he had prepared. But his mind couldn't escape the tension from the events of the day. The discoveries at the police station still lingered in his head. When the speech began, Richard walked onto the stage and received a light round of applause from the audience. This was a community event, not a grand television program, so the lighting wasn't too bright. Most of the attendees were former athletes, coaches, and water sports enthusiasts. They all knew about Zara's disappearance. It had been a tragedy in the community, but it hadn't garnered widespread media attention. Richard began his speech, talking about the importance of supporting young athletes and water safety. He shared about Zara, her resilience, and her determination. The audience listened attentively, clapping at appropriate moments. After the speech, Richard stepped down from the stage and walked over to the table where his old swimming friends were waiting. "Great speech, Richard," Tom, a former Olympic athlete who had trained with him years ago, said. "You always know how to move people." "Thanks," Richard replied, taking a glass of water. But he couldn't focus on the small talk with his friends. His mind was still spinning from the discoveries of the day. He couldn't keep the secret any longer. "Listen, today I found Zara's GoPro camera." His group of friends looked at each other, their expressions filled with disbelief. "After 4 years?" Mike, another former athlete, asked. "Where did you find it?" "Far off from her usual route," Richard explained, gripping the camera tightly as he continued. "And inside it, there's a video from the day she disappeared." Richard lowered his voice and recounted the details of the exchange at the police station, then showed them the photo he had taken of the boat's logo on his phone. Tom leaned forward to take a closer look. "This is the logo of Ocean Elite Marine," Tom said. "They're one of the local companies that sponsors Olympic athletes." "Really? "Do you guys know anything about them?" Richard asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "We don't know much, just that they've been very generous in providing equipment for water sports athletes," Tom replied. "In fact, they have a booth right across the room." Richard turned to look at the spot Tom was pointing to, and sure enough, there was a booth decorated with the Ocean Elite Marine logo. The staff at the booth were wearing uniforms, greeting visitors warmly. "I think I need to talk to them," Richard said, suddenly standing up. His friends exchanged worried glances, but no one tried to stop him. He walked cautiously toward the booth, trying to remain calm despite the rising feeling of unease within him. Two staff members looked up as Richard approached. One was an older man with graying hair, and the other was a young man with a bright smile. "Good afternoon," the older man greeted him. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Actually, I'm curious about your company," Richard said, his voice calm but firm. "I heard you sponsor Olympic athletes." "That's right," the younger man replied cheerfully. "It's part of our corporate social responsibility program. We provide boats, equipment, and transportation to promising athletes who don't have the resources to train." "That's commendable," Richard said, then carefully asked, "Do you know someone named Lucas? Is he involved with your company?" The two men exchanged a quick glance. The smiles on their faces slowly faded, and their friendly demeanor started to diminish. The younger man hesitated. "Lucas? There could be many employees with that name. Do you know their full name?" Richard shook his head, then decided to try another approach. He pulled out his phone and showed them the photo he had taken of the boat's logo. "I'm trying to identify this boat, and it's possible a man named Lucas used it." Both staff members showed clear signs of tension. The young man stammered, "We have quite a few boats, you know." The older man added, "If you need information about a boat, you should talk to the staff at the pier. We're just here to handle marketing." Richard thanked them and turned to leave, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As he walked away from the booth, he noticed the young staff member had stepped outside, holding a phone, his face showing signs of worry. He ran his hand through his hair, then signaled to his colleague. Within minutes, they began packing up the booth, clearly preparing to leave. Richard didn't hesitate. He turned and made his way toward the exit. However, as he stepped outside, the event organizer stopped him. "Mr. Callahan, where are you going? You still need to give the closing speech in 20 minutes." "Sorry," Richard replied, his tone decisive. "Family matter. I have to leave now." Without waiting for a response from the organizer, Richard rushed out and hurried toward the parking lot. He just caught sight of the two staff members loading their equipment into a truck with the Ocean Elite Marine logo. His heart raced. Although he wasn't sure about everything, he knew he couldn't ignore the feeling that these two men were connected to Zara's disappearance. Richard kept a careful distance behind the Ocean Elite Marine truck as it sped down the coastal roads of Crescent Bay. The rational part of him began to doubt his actions, relying solely on his instincts and the anxious reactions of the two employees when he mentioned the name Lucas. But the father in him, the one who had never given up on searching for Zara, felt that this wasn't a coincidence. "I hope this leads somewhere," he whispered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Suddenly, his phone rang, making him jump. The screen displayed Detective Morgan's name. Richard answered through the car's Bluetooth. "Mr. Callahan, I've finished watching the video," Morgan's voice came through. "We've assembled a team and are on our way to the pier to investigate Ocean Elite Marine. We've already contacted the company." "What's the next step?" Richard asked, his eyes still fixed on the truck ahead. "I'm working with them," Morgan replied. "But what are you doing? Following them?" "Yes," Richard said, a bit tense. "I'm following two of their employees. They were at the charity event, but as soon as I asked about Lucas and showed them the photo of the boat, they suddenly left." "You're following them?" Morgan's voice sharpened. "Richard, this could be dangerous. Are you sure they're a threat?" I'm not sure, but they're acting suspicious. They said they're marketing employees, but when I mentioned Lucas, their expressions changed drastically. Where are you? Morgan asked immediately. On the coastal road, about 10 miles north of Crescent Bay Pier, Richard answered, glancing in the rearview mirror. It's not the main road to the pier. They turned onto a side road, away from the harbor. Send me your location right now, Morgan instructed, his voice serious. And Richard, be careful. Don't do anything reckless. If anything seems off, call me immediately. Got it, Richard promised, but the truck in front suddenly sped up, causing him to accelerate to maintain the distance. While trailing behind, he forgot Morgan's request. The coastal road wound around, with the beach appearing on the left, tall cliffs blocking the path. After a few miles, the truck turned onto a small, unnamed road that Richard had never seen before. He slowed down, waiting until the truck disappeared around a bend before following. The road led down near the shoreline, ending at a secluded pier. This wasn't the main Crescent Bay harbor that he knew. The facility was in severe disrepair, with rusty docks and old buildings. Richard parked far from the pier, hiding behind a row of pine trees to avoid being noticed. No other vehicles were in the parking lot, and if he got any closer, his car would easily be spotted. This isn't Ocean Elite Marine's facility, Richard whispered to himself as he turned off the engine. He got out of the car and walked toward the pier, trying to stay hidden behind bushes and piles of old gear scattered around. He watched the two employees from the event carry boxes from the truck into the pier, meeting 3 other men. As Richard approached to eavesdrop on their conversation, a large boat appeared, coming close to the pier. The 3 men from the boat stepped off and met the waiting group. They conversed, their faces tense. "We need to move fast," one of the men in the group said, loud enough for Richard to hear. "Prepare the area. The boss is waiting on the yacht, and he's not happy." Richard stepped back behind a pile of old crates, making sure no one saw him. 2 of the group members began patrolling around the pier, and Richard quickly found a hiding spot under a tarp covering old boat parts. He stayed silent, only hearing the footsteps of the 2 guards pass close by his hiding spot. A few minutes later, he heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. The car door opened and closed, followed by the voices of men. Richard's heart tightened as he heard a woman's voice whimpering. "Get on the boat," a harsh voice ordered. "Be quiet and keep your head down." "Please," the woman begged. "We've done everything you asked." "Shut up and move," the gruff voice barked. The sound of footsteps on the pier echoed, followed by the engine of the boat starting. Richard exhaled quietly, unwilling to leave his hiding spot while the guards continued patrolling. He heard the large boat begin to pull away from the pier, the engine noise growing fainter. Richard couldn't stand still any longer. His suspicions had been confirmed. Zara didn't die in a training accident. She had been kidnapped. And from what he had just heard, it was possible she had been held captive for the past 4 years. With trembling hands, Richard pulled out his phone and called Detective Morgan. "Richard, where are you?" Morgan interrupted. "You haven't shared your location yet." "About 10 miles north of Crescent Bay Pier," Richard said urgently, "along the coastal road toward the northern tip. I just witnessed a human trafficking operation involving Ocean Elite Marine." "Human trafficking?" Morgan repeated, his voice tense. "Yes. I heard them talking about the girls they've kept for the past 4 years, exactly the time Zara went missing, and I saw a speedboat taking women offshore." Richard's voice choked. "I think my daughter might be one of them." "Stay where you are, Richard," Morgan ordered. "We'll send a team right away. Don't do anything reckless." "No," Richard responded firmly. "Don't come here. There's nothing left to find. We need to keep up with that boat. I'll head back to the main pier now. Meet me there with every boat you have." "Understood," Morgan replied. "We'll coordinate with the harbor patrol and meet you at the main pier in 20 minutes. "Hurry," Richard urged. "I think they're moving the girls because they know we've discovered them. This could be our only chance." He ended the call and rushed back to his car, his mind in turmoil with what had just happened. Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly as his boat sped out of Crescent Bay Harbor, heading toward the yacht that Morgan had mentioned. His heart pounded, not just from fear, but also from hope that he might finally find Zara. The tension rose as the sun began to set, its soft yellow light casting over the vast expanse of the sea. After a few minutes, the police boat carrying the team arrived at the meeting point. Richard rushed aboard and found Morgan and his team standing next to two police boats and a large Coast Guard vessel. Everyone was preparing for a raid. The atmosphere was serious, tense. "Richard!" Morgan called out loudly when he saw him. "Get on board! We're ready!" Richard stepped forward, his mind overwhelmed with 1,000 worries. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "They're moving them to a yacht offshore," Richard said quickly, his voice betraying his concern. "I heard them say, the boss is waiting on the yacht. I think they're taking the girls there." Morgan nodded, his eyes lighting up with the information. "We have units ready on the water. A helicopter is also on its way to assist. The harbor patrol has been tracking the boat you described via the coastal surveillance system." An officer approached them holding a tablet. "The boat has been spotted. It's moving 12 miles southeast. The speed suggests they're heading toward the Channel Islands." "Exactly," Richard said, his eyes scanning the sea. "There are many secluded coves around those islands. The yacht could anchor there without anyone knowing." Morgan turned back to Richard. "Thank you for your help, but I need you to stay here while we handle this. We'll send in the forces right away." "Not a chance," Richard replied firmly. "I'm going with you." Morgan frowned, disagreeing. "Richard, this isn't a request. It's a dangerous situation that may involve armed criminals." "I know these waters better than anyone here," Richard interrupted. "I've been diving here for 20 years. The caves, the hidden routes, the dangerous currents. You can't do this without me." Morgan hesitated, seeming to weigh the option between following protocol and acknowledging Richard's knowledge of the area. Richard continued, his voice more serious. "If Zara is on that yacht, I have to be there. She hasn't seen me in 4 years. She'll be scared, hurt. She needs me." Finally, Morgan sighed, conceding. "Fine, you can come with us on the main boat, but you have to follow orders. If we encounter resistance, you need to stay back." "Understood," Richard replied quickly, stepping onto the boat and helping the captain plan the most effective route based on the information about the speedboat. The boat sped forward, cutting through the waves, and inside Richard, a mixture of fear and hope began to rise. Was Zara still alive? Was she still the girl he had once known? A little while later, the helicopter soared overhead, its engines roaring, providing aerial support. The police boats and Coast Guard vessel also moved in the direction of the boat they were pursuing. After nearly an hour, the radio crackled. "This is the air team. We've spotted the boat. It's approaching the large yacht about 12 miles southeast of your location. We'll send the coordinates now." The captain quickly adjusted the course, slowing down to avoid detection, using the helicopter as their eyes from above. "The boat has reached the yacht," the radio announced. "They're transferring people onto the boat." Richard squinted through the binoculars, and before long he could see the luxurious white yacht about 2 miles away. He saw shadows moving on the deck. Though the distance was too far to see clearly, Richard could tell it was 3 women in dark clothes being moved below deck. "We need to maintain our approach speed," Morgan ordered over the radio. "We don't want them to spot us before we get close." The police team checked their weapons and communication equipment. One team member was already geared up for diving, ready to enter the water if necessary. "The air team reports that we see activity on the yacht," the radio crackled. "They've spotted us. The yacht is accelerating, heading south." "Full speed ahead," Morgan ordered. The engines of the police boats roared as they sped toward the yacht. Richard kept the binoculars in his hands, not taking his eyes off the yacht ahead. "The speedboat is turning toward us," the captain warned. "They're going to try to block us." "Air team," "Are you still tracking the yacht?" Morgan asked over the radio. "Confirmed. The yacht is accelerating, moving quickly south. But now we see people on deck. They're bringing women onto the deck. It looks like they're preparing to get them into the water." "Into the water?" Richard blurted out, panicked. "They're going to take these people into the water. This area has so many underwater caves. If they know the routes, they could disappear completely." Morgan quickly relayed the information over the radio. The fleet adjusted its speed, preparing for any potential scenario. The police boat sped through the waves, steady and fast, heading toward the accelerating yacht. The sea was dark, but the lights on the boat still shone like powerful flashes through the night, creating a stark contrast between light and darkness. Each wave crashing against the hull made the tension in the air even more palpable, as if nature itself was responding to the approaching storm. Richard couldn't take his eyes off the yacht, the anxiety within him growing stronger. His mind was locked on one single thought: Zara. Every second that passed could be the only chance to save her. He knew that if they dove into the water without reaching them in time, they might never see her again. If they entered those underwater caves, there would be no trace left to follow. "We can't let them escape," Morgan shouted, his voice sharp, a command for the whole team. "Our 3 divers are ready to enter the water." Richard saw the 3 divers already geared up, each with the necessary equipment, ready to face any situation. His eyes locked on them, unable to look away, the tension and worry consuming his mind. "Let me go with them," he said, his voice firm and nearly unbearable. "We can't wait any longer." Morgan turned to look at Richard, his eyes filled with concern. Everything was coming to a head, and Richard knew that if they didn't act now, they might lose their only chance. "Richard, you can't go into the water. This is a dangerous mission. I need you to stay on the boat, command, and ensure the team's safety." "No," Richard immediately protested, his voice resolute. "I know these underwater caves better than anyone here. I've been diving here all my life. Without me, you'll never find them. We won't have another chance." Morgan looked at him for a long time, silent as he weighed the potential dangers. Finally, he sighed, Richard's determination undeniable. "All right. But if anything happens, you stay on the boat." Richard nodded, his resolve unshakable. If Zara was really there, she would need him. She would be scared, confused, and no one but him could help her now. She was his daughter, and no matter what, he would never leave her again. "Watch out! They've spotted us!" a diver yelled, his voice frantic as the speedboat began turning toward them. A few gunshots rang through the air, cutting through the quiet ocean like a warning. Those sounds seemed to tear through the night, making Richard's heart race even faster. The divers quickly prepared their gear, while Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly, the anxiety surging within him. He knew now wasn't the time to worry about his own safety. Everything depended on whether they could reach them in time. "Maintain speed! Don't stop!" Morgan shouted, his gaze resolute, as though unwilling to lose another second. The boat surged forward toward the yacht, the waves crashing against the hull, making everything rock violently. The divers continued preparing, busy checking their equipment while Richard couldn't take his eyes off the speedboat, which was rapidly closing the gap. "Dive!" a diver shouted, his voice steady. And immediately the 3 divers jumped into the water simultaneously, blending into the cold water like ghosts in the night. Richard watched them, unwilling to take his eyes off them. The tension grew stronger inside him as their boat neared the yacht. Each second felt like an eternity, and desperation began to creep into his mind. At that moment, a small boat from the yacht began to turn, seemingly preparing to leave. "We need to act immediately," Richard shouted, his eyes fixed on the small boat that was getting ready to move, a sense of urgency overtaking him. Morgan turned to look at him, his eyes still calm but clearly tense. "The air team is on their way," he replied, trying to stay composed. "We need to intercept them before they leave completely." Suddenly, a diver shot up from the water, his face filled with determination. "We've found them!" he yelled, his voice almost cracking with joy. "3 women are tied up and being brought onto the boat. One of them might be Zara." Richard's heart stopped. "Zara!" he exclaimed, realizing that from that moment, everything seemed to be happening too fast. The overwhelming excitement made it impossible for him to think of anything else. "We need to chase that boat right now." Morgan immediately gave the order. "Chase them quickly. Don't let them escape." Richard grabbed the binoculars, urgently scanning the sky and the sea. The boat was turning toward the secluded coves he knew well. It was the perfect place for them to disappear without being detected. He couldn't let Zara and the other women be lost again. This was their only chance. The officers quickly adjusted their course, and their boat sped forward, cutting through the waves like monsters challenging the ocean. Morgan sat beside Richard, continuously issuing orders to the team, but his eyes couldn't leave the yacht and the speedboat trying to escape. Everyone understood that this was the decisive moment. "We're close now," Richard said, his voice tight with tension. "We need to move quickly now. If they get into the underwater caves, we'll lose them forever." Time seemed to slow down. Each moment felt invaluable, like a moment that couldn't be taken back. Finally, the police boat and the yacht met. The divers plunged into the water, while Richard and Morgan remained on the boat, observing every move from afar. "The officers have boarded the boat," a diver yelled, his voice a bit surprised. "We've found the 3 women, and they're bringing them onto the boat." A light wave of relief surged through Richard, but he knew this was just the beginning. Zara might still be alive, but he couldn't leave her again. The girl he had searched for over 4 years. Finally, he could save her. The police boat cut through the waves, speeding toward the yacht only a few hundred meters away. The sea was dark, but the lights on the boat shone like powerful flashes through the night, creating a stark contrast between light and darkness. Richard felt his heart stop when he heard the announcement from the officer on board. "We found 3 women, and one of them might be Zara." These words hit him like a wave crashing into his mind, but questions he couldn't shake arose within him. Is she okay? Will she recognize him after 4 long years? Every second felt like a struggle between hope and fear, and Richard couldn't help but wonder if he would make it in time. "Everything depends on us now," Richard thought to himself, his eyes glued to the approaching yacht. He knew that just one small mistake, 1 second lost, and the last chance would slip away. "What do we do next?" Richard asked, his eyes still tense, locked on the yacht that was getting closer by the second. "Keep the speed, approach from the side," Morgan ordered, his voice sharp and decisive. "We can't lose track of anyone. We can't let them escape again." The boat surged forward, and all that could be heard were the powerful waves hitting the side of the boat, creating sounds like thunder in the dark night. Everything around him seemed to vanish in that moment. Richard could feel each sway of the ship, the roar of the engine beneath his feet, but nothing could distract him. His mind was completely focused on one thing: Zara. All that he had been through, the months of searching, the moments of despair, now all converged in this one decisive moment. If she was still there, he had to save her. There was no turning back. "Get ready," Morgan shouted. The officers quickly took their positions, checking their weapons, adjusting their gear, and preparing for any situation that might arise. Each person knew that the lives of 3 women, possibly Zara, were in their hands. As the distance shrank to about 50 meters, Richard saw figures on the yacht, faint but clear enough to recognize. His sharp eyes identified the kidnappers standing on the deck, watching their every move. The tension surged within him, as if an invisible hand was gripping his heart. Everything would be decided right now. There was no time for fear. This was the only chance to save the girls. "We're here," Richard whispered, his voice catching. This moment seemed to stretch on forever. Everything around him slowed down, leaving only the sound of the waves crashing and the engine roaring. One officer signaled, and the police boat shifted direction, approaching the yacht from the side. The divers were ready to jump into the water immediately, prepared to rescue the women from the boat if necessary. The police team moved silently, each person understanding their role, only the rumble of the engine and the soft waves hitting the side of the boat breaking the silence. Everything was being set up for the decisive raid. As their boat got closer to the yacht, Richard could no longer hold back. He immediately jumped into the water, not thinking for a second. The cold water slapped his face, but he felt nothing but the burning determination. Everything had one goal now: Zara. He dove deeper, his hand reaching out, determined to find her and pull her from the kidnapper's grasp. Underwater, the scene was chaotic. The divers faced resistance from the kidnappers, but they kept fighting. Richard saw a man holding a girl tightly, her hands bound to the body of the kidnapper. Another diver was trying to cut the ropes binding another girl, while the kidnappers struggled to push the diver away. The air underwater was suffocating, the tension so thick it felt impossible to breathe. These moments seemed to stretch on forever. Richard swam closer, his hand reaching out, trying to free Zara from the kidnapper's control. But as he got closer, one of the kidnappers saw him and immediately drew a harpoon gun, aiming it at him. With no other choice, Richard charged toward the man, fast as lightning. He grabbed the gun and prevented it from firing. The diver behind him quickly subdued the kidnapper, making him unable to continue attacking. The entire team quickly surrounded and apprehended the remaining kidnappers, but now Richard only cared about Zara. Zara cried, her eyes full of fear and disbelief, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Dad, is it really you?" she whispered, staring at the man standing in front of her. "I'm here, sweetie. I'm taking you out of here," Richard replied, his voice thick with emotion, both pain and joy mixed. He pulled Zara toward him, but she was too weak, almost unable to breathe after months of captivity, yet she could feel the safety he brought. Other divers quickly approached, bringing Zara up and supporting her. The team began securing the remaining kidnappers, bringing them onto the boat for arrest. Richard felt a surge of new strength as he saw Zara, part joy, part sorrow. She was still alive. She had returned to him. The officers quickly brought Zara aboard and began giving her first aid. Everything happened in silence, each second invaluable. Richard followed them aboard, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. He barely heard Morgan's voice, his tone relieved but still serious. "We've succeeded. The kidnappers will never be free again." Zara still couldn't believe she had been rescued. She looked at Richard, her eyes filled with tears, but on her face was a radiant smile, though tired, still holding some fear. But she knew she was safe now. "Dad, I can't believe you found me after everything that happened," Zara whispered, her voice weak but full of hope. "I never gave up, Zara." "Never," Richard replied, his hand tightening around his daughter's. His feeling at that moment was the completion of a painful journey, but in the end, it was a happy ending. With the help of the police team, all the victims were rescued and brought back to land. As their boat entered Crescent Bay Harbor, a magnificent sight unfolded. People clapped, welcoming the girls, including Zara, the girl who had endured so much over the past 4 years. Although the investigation was still ongoing, for Richard, this was a victory. He had finally found Zara. Though the trials and investigations were far from over, at least now he had brought his daughter home, and that was the most important thing. As the police boat entered Crescent Bay Harbor, the atmosphere around became bustling, filled with urgency and intensity. Ambulances were already parked on the shore, their flashing lights reflecting off the sea, creating a scene straight out of an action movie. Medical and rescue teams hurried about, doctors and rescue workers ready to receive the girls who had just been rescued, taking them to ambulances for treatment and first aid. The growl of engines and the voices of the rescue team seemed to fuel the tension. Richard stood beside Zara, his hand tightly holding hers, his heart tightening as he looked at her. Despite her tired face, her eyes swollen from crying, there was still a flicker of hope in those eyes. Zara was back, after 4 long years of darkness. Part of him couldn't believe that this moment had finally come. He had never given up. And now she was here with him. "You'll be all right," Richard whispered to Zara, his eyes fixed on hers, filled with both awe and happiness. He could feel Zara's pain, her weakness, but he also felt a surge of joy. "I won't let you go again." Zara looked at her father, her eyes still filled with tears, but there was a sense of peace returning to them. "I can't believe you found me, after everything I've been through," she said, her voice weak but full of gratitude. Those words were a confirmation that she had found solace after all those dark years. She had never imagined she would be embraced in her father's arms after everything that had happened. Richard patted Zara's head, trying to remain calm despite his heart aching as he saw his daughter so thin, exhausted, her pale skin and dry lips. But nothing could make him falter. "I always believed this day would come," Richard said, his voice warm but firm. "I never gave up, Zara. I won't ever let you go again." The doctors and medical staff quickly moved forward, taking Zara and the other girls into the ambulances. Richard wanted to go with his daughter, not wanting to take his eyes off her for even a second, but a police officer from the rescue team stopped him. "Mr. Callahan, I understand you want to go with your daughter, but we need to do some legal procedures first. She will be cared for immediately," the officer explained, his tone gentle yet professional. Richard nodded, though he couldn't help but feel worried, unable to shake his unease as he watched the ambulance drive off. He knew Zara would be fine soon, but the anxiety still lingered like a shadow hanging over him. He stood still, his eyes following the ambulance as it disappeared into the night. His heart was filled with emotion. 4 years of searching had led to this moment. All his efforts, all his hopes were finally rewarded. He couldn't believe he had found Zara, the girl who had been missing for so long. A long, painful, and desperate journey, but in the end, it was all worth it. As the ambulances drove away, Morgan approached Richard, his expression thoughtful, very different from the tense demeanor before. He looked at Richard with respect and deep understanding. "Richard, I have to tell you, what you've done is something not many people could do. There has never been a father as determined as you. Zara might not have returned if it weren't for your patience and resolve," Morgan said, his voice full of emotion and recognition. Richard remained silent, his eyes gazing into the distance at the dock where the journey had begun. He knew that although this journey had ended with Zara's return, there was still much to be done. The kidnappers, the mystery surrounding Ocean Elite Marine, and the new life Zara had to start. He couldn't help but think of all these things. "We'll continue the investigation into Ocean Elite Marine and those involved," Morgan said, his gaze understanding and sincere. "There's still much to be uncovered. But now, Zara is back, safe." "Thank you, Morgan," Richard replied, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything." After the ambulances had left, Richard stood alone at the dock, his eyes following them as they disappeared. The waves crashed against the shore, carrying the chaotic emotions in his heart. He couldn't believe he had found Zara after 4 long years. Those years had been painful, but now all he needed to do was help Zara recover and return to a normal life, though the road ahead would still be long and full of challenges. "My daughter is still alive," Richard whispered, his voice choking. Tears suddenly fell, feeling as though a storm had just passed through his heart. These tears weren't of pain, but of happiness. A journey full of pain, but now it ended with a wonderful result. With Zara by his side, Richard knew that no difficulty ahead could stop him. He would protect her, never letting her suffer again. After all they had been through, a new chapter in their lives had begun, a chapter full of hope, resilience, and boundless love. Richard stood looking out at the sea, a gentle smile spreading across his face. Though he still felt worried, hope had returned to him. Whatever happened next would not scare him anymore. Zara was back, and that was the most important thing. Sometime later, Richard had brought Zara home, where she would begin a new life, a life she never imagined could happen after everything she had been through. Although Zara was still very weak, Richard's presence beside her made her feel safe. Both of them knew that, although the psychological wounds could heal, it would take a long time for them both to truly recover. One evening, late at night, Richard sat at the dining table, watching Zara intently staring at an old painting depicting memories of the past. The painting now seemed like part of a memory, but Zara knew it would always live in her heart. The days of training, the dreams of the Olympics. "Dad, I used to dream about big competitions. What do you think I'll do now?" Zara asked, her voice lowering as if she was lost in thoughts about the future. Richard looked at her, his gaze full of empathy and love. "You can do anything, Zara. I just want you to be happy. Whether it's the Olympics or something else, what matters is that you find yourself, find your purpose in life." Zara smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't know what I'll do, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not alone anymore. I have you, Dad." Richard felt a wave of happiness spread through him. Although the scars from the past couldn't heal immediately, he knew they had overcome great hardships, and now they could move forward together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he wouldn't let Zara face it alone. A while later, the doctors and medical staff had completed the first aid for Zara, and the other girls had been taken care of as well. Richard wanted to go with his daughter, not wanting to take his eyes off her for a second, but a police officer from the rescue team stopped him, informing him about the legal procedures that needed to be completed. "Mr. Callahan, we understand you want to go with your daughter, but we need to complete some formalities. She will be cared for and monitored," the officer said gently. Richard nodded, though he still felt uneasy. He knew Zara would be well taken care of, but the unease lingered like a shadow over him. He stood still for a long time, watching the ambulance drive away, his heart full of emotion. The long road of searching had finally ended here, and though there was no conclusion yet, he knew one thing: Zara was back. As things settled down, Morgan approached Richard, his expression a little more serious but filled with sympathy. "Richard, I want to say that what you did is something not many people could do. Zara might not have returned if it weren't for your perseverance and determination," Morgan said, his voice full of respect. Richard remained silent, his eyes gazing at the vehicles disappearing down the street. He didn't need to say anything, as he felt the acknowledgement. Everything had been answered, at least for Zara. Whatever remained would be dealt with later. "We'll continue investigating Ocean Elite Marine and the people involved. There's much more to uncover," Morgan continued, his gaze understanding. "But at least now, Zara is back, safe." "Thank you, Morgan," Richard replied, his voice choking. "Thank you for everything." A while later, when the ambulances had left, Richard stood alone on the dock, his eyes following them. The waves still crashed against the shore, carrying the heavy emotions in his heart. He couldn't believe he had found Zara after 4 long years. Although the journey had been painful, he now knew that all he needed to do was help Zara recover, give her a new life, even though the road ahead was still long. "My daughter is still alive," Richard whispered, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of pain, but of happiness. a harsh journey. But in the end, the result was the greatest gift. Zara was back. They would rebuild their life together, even though the painful days still haunted them, but they would overcome it together, no longer alone. Richard stood looking out at the sea, a gentle smile spreading across his face, though his heart still carried some worry. But he also knew that no matter what, as long as Zara was by his side, they could overcome anything.